I would like to introduce today's panel. Becky Howarth is one of the staff on my team that will be conducting plan reviews.
Hi, good afternoon.
The other panelists and I will be available during the Q&A portions. We have Cynthia Dunn, Manager of the Materials Management and Local Assistance Division's Product Stewardship Section.
Hi, everybody.
Also participating are Trevor and Eric from the Waste Permitting, Compliance, and Mitigation Division. Trevor O'Shaughnessy is Manager of the Jurisdiction and Product Enforcement Section.
Good afternoon, everybody.
And Eric Yee is Supervisor of the Pharmaceutical and Sharps Enforcement Unit.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon.
Last but not least, Arena Kaminer is our Legal Counsel.
Hi, everyone.
And now I'm going to hand it over to Becky to walk us through today's presentation.
All right. Thanks, Jason. All right, so good afternoon. A quick note regarding this webinar platform. If the presentation seems a little bit small, you can enlarge the presentation by clicking on the arrows at the bottom right. So I'm going to begin by going over today's agenda. I'll be reviewing the requirements for stewardship plans, initial program budgets, and the submittal process and timeline. In addition to a general Q&A at the end of the webinar, I will pause to address any questions at the end of each section. So please send your questions via email to pharmasharps@calrecycle.ca.gov. We appreciate the questions we received in advance of the webinar and have tailored the presentation to address them. And a couple of notes. On the slides, you may see a few acronyms. So PRC refers to the Public Resources Code, which houses the statute, and CCR refers to Title 14 of the California Code of Regulations and houses the regulations which were adopted by CalRecycle and approved by the Office of Administrative Law on January 7th, 2021. It might be helpful for you to follow along with the statute and regulations, and these are posted on CalRecycle's Pharmaceutical and Sharps Waste Stewardship webpage and are linked in the agenda. So first, I'm going to pause. Are there any questions in the inbox, Marilee? Marilee, are you there?
I'm not seeing any, Becky.
Okay, thank you. All right, so just to kind of set the scene, I'm going to go over a very simplified high-level timeline of the plan development, review, and implementation activities that will occur from January 2021 through July 2022. So the purpose of this is just to provide context for the requirements that I'll be going over in this presentation, and I will go into a much more detailed timeline later in the presentation. So starting on the left side and moving to the right, the regulations were effective on January 7th, and stewardship plans must be submitted to CalRecycle within 6 months of that date. However, this deadline can be delayed due to the Board of Pharmacy's review, which I'll get into a little more later. And then CalRecycle has 90 days to review and either approve, conditionally approve, or disapprove plans. However, if CalRecycle consults with other state agencies, this time doesn't count towards the 90 days, and I'll also get more into that later. And finally, approved stewardship plans, approved stewardship programs must be fully implemented no later than 270 days after plan approval. First, I will be going over the definition of covered entity and who must submit a stewardship plan. Statute requires a program operator to submit a stewardship plan and initial program budget. The program operator of a stewardship program is either an individual covered entity or a group of covered entities as part of a nonprofit stewardship organization. It is up to each entity to determine if it is a covered entity pursuant to Section 42030F1 of the Public Resources Code. The definition of covered entity is tiered. So the manufacturer of a covered drug or sharp that is sold in or into the state of California is presumed to be the covered entity for that drug or sharp. If there is no manufacturer that sells in or into the state, the covered entity for that covered drug or sharp will be the distributor or wholesaler who sells that drug or sharp in or into the state, and so on down the tiers that you can see on the screen until an entity meets the definition of covered entity. If you determine that you are a manufacturer, distributor, wholesaler, repackager, owner or licensee of a trademark or brand, or importer of covered products, as described in the statutory definition of covered entity, it may be prudent to coordinate with members of your supply chain to ensure that the obligations of a covered entity are being met, including being a party to a stewardship plan and other requirements under the law. One example is the requirement to report lists of covered and non-covered drugs and sharps to the Board of Pharmacy on a yearly basis under PRC section 42031. All right, I'm going to pause. Have we received any questions?
Not yet, Becky. Please
All
continue.
right, great. So now I will go over what must be included in a stewardship plan. The content of a stewardship plan is specified in statute and clarified in the regulations, sections 18973.2, which relates to covered drugs, and 18973.3, which relates to home-generated sharps waste. So as I just alluded, there are two types of stewardship plans, covered drugs and home-generated sharps waste. Many of the requirements for these two types of plans are the same, but they differ in some ways, and I will note when I'm discussing a requirement that only applies to one type of stewardship plan. Additionally, there are some statutory and regulatory terms that are used throughout this presentation, and when preparing a stewardship plan, it is important to use this specific terminology. So for example, the term ultimate user is defined in statute and should be the term used in a stewardship plan and not words like resident or consumer, which are not defined in statute and might make it unclear whether the plan describes a program that will comply with the law. All right, so the first bullet, a stewardship plan must include contact information for the stewardship organization and each participating covered entity, and identify each covered drug or sharp sold or offered for sale by each participating covered entity. In addition, there are some requirements that apply to only a covered drugs stewardship plan. Some examples include to provide a list of authorized collectors for the stewardship program and their contact information, to provide a list of potential authorized collectors and reasons for excluding any from participation in the program, and to give a description of good faith negotiations with potential authorized collectors and efforts to work with retail pharmacies to meet the convenience standard. Next, the plan must include determination of compliance or non-compliance from the Board of Pharmacy and other applicable agencies' review. This occurs prior to submitting the plan to CalRecycle, and I will go into more detail on this when I go over the timeline. And the last requirement listed on this slide is that a plan must include an initial program budget that demonstrates adequate funding for all administrative and operational costs of the stewardship program for the first 5 years. I will go over all the requirements for the initial program budget later in the webinar. Next, I am going to cover the collection system requirements specifically for a covered drug stewardship plan. For covered drugs, the stewardship plan must describe a collection, transportation, and disposal system that meets the convenience standard for collection sites in each county. The convenience standard is laid out in PRC section 42032.2 A1F and requires that the collection system provides for 5 authorized collection sites in a county or 1 authorized collection site per 50,000 people in that county, whichever is greater, provides for a reasonable geographic spread of authorized collection sites and an explanation for that geographic spread, and provides for a mail-back program covering any counties where there is not an authorized retail pharmacy operating as an authorized collection site. The next requirement is to describe tracking mechanisms for collection, transportation, and disposal of covered drugs. The plan should also describe metrics, including weight, but may include other metrics such as volume or count, etc., that will be used to measure the amount of covered drugs collected at each authorized collection site. The plan should provide the name and addresses of service providers used to transport, process, or dispose of covered drugs collected through the stewardship program. In addition to the collection system, the plan must also provide mail-back services or an alternative form of collection and disposal system for ultimate users who are homeless, homebound, or disabled, for instances when the convenience standard cannot be met in any county, and as an alternative method of collection for covered drugs that cannot be accepted or commingled with other covered drugs. The plan must also include the metrics that will be used to measure the amount of pre-addressed, prepaid mail-back materials distributed or alternative form of collection and disposal system provided, and the metrics used to measure the amount of materials returned. Next, the plan must describe a service schedule that meets the needs of each authorized collection site. Plans should explain the corrective actions that will be taken if a program operator discovers critical instances of non-compliance with stewardship plan policies and procedures. For example, if a take-back program discovers a vulnerability that drugs were somehow retrievable from a secure collection receptacle, that program operator would describe which corrective actions would be taken to remedy the vulnerability. Plans should describe how each participating collection site will be funded or reimbursed if applicable. For example, the pharmacies, our pharmacies being reimbursed for the labor costs associated with servicing a collection bin, our kiosk technicians being deployed at the program operator's expense, etc. And the final bullet on this slide, plans should include the standard operating procedures that will address incidents related to safety and security, including processes to ensure that the department and applicable local, state, and federal agencies are notified of the incident, and an explanation of actions that will be taken to change policies, procedures, and tracking mechanisms to alleviate the problems and improve safety and security. Next, I will cover the collection system requirements for a home-generated sharps waste stewardship plan. For sharps, the collection system must be a mail-back program, and the stewardship plan must describe how it will provide or initiate distribution of a sharps waste container and mail-back materials at the point of sale or prior at no cost to the ultimate user. Additionally, the containers and mail-back materials provided to ultimate users should be sufficient to accommodate a volume of sharps over a selected period of time. So for example, if an ultimate user is picking up their sharps prescription every month, the sharps container that the ultimate user is provided should be big enough to hold at least a month's worth of sharps waste. The containers and mailback materials should also include prepaid postage, all necessary information for proper sharps waste disposal, and the program operator's website and toll-free telephone number. Next, the plan needs to include the name and addresses of service providers used to transport, process, or dispose of home-generated sharps waste through the stewardship program. In addition, the plan must describe any supplemental collection methods that may be provided in addition to, but not in lieu of, the mailback program. These methods may include, but are not limited to, a secure receptacle-based collection program or take-back collection events. Both of these potential supplemental methods must be authorized and approved home-generated sharps consolidation points under the Medical Waste Management Act. Supplemental collection methods must also include standard operating procedures that will address incidents related to safety and security, including processes to ensure that the department and applicable local, state, and federal agencies are notified of the incident, and an explanation of actions that will be taken to change policies, procedures, and tracking mechanisms to alleviate the problems and improve safety and security. Moving down to the next bullet, the stewardship plan must include metrics such as weight, volume, or count, etc., to measure the amount of sharps waste containers and mailback materials distributed and returned, the amount of sharps waste collected through supplemental collection methods, and the amount collected by household hazardous waste facilities. The plan should explain corrective actions that will be taken if a program operator discovers critical instances of noncompliance with stewardship plan policies and procedures. And finally, the program operator must coordinate with local agencies for the removal of home-generated sharps waste from local household hazardous waste facilities, either by reimbursement for transportation and disposal costs or removal of home-generated sharps waste. Local agencies can request reimbursement for costs incurred 270 days or more after the approval of a stewardship plan for home-generated sharps waste. So if you are a local agency, I would recommend signing up for our email listserv so you will be notified when sharps waste stewardship plans are approved. All right. This is the final slide discussing stewardship plans and includes requirements that apply to both covered drugs and sharps waste stewardship plans. First, it is necessary to include a description of how and when and how and where collection, transportation, and disposal system records will be maintained. A stewardship plan must also include a comprehensive education and outreach program that describes the metrics, describes the materials that will be utilized, that will be distributed in languages suited to local demographics. It must establish a website that is functional with mobile platforms, has language options suited to local demographics, and is accessible to disabled individuals. The website must also include a mechanism to accept requests for mailback materials from ultimate users who are homeless, homebound, or disabled, information on collection site locations, and information on promoting the stewardship program and proper disposal. The education and outreach program must also establish a toll-free telephone number that offers language options suited to local demographics, accepts calls via human representative, and provides services for hearing and speech impaired individuals. This phone number must also accept requests for mailback materials from ultimate users who are homeless, homebound, or disabled. Additionally, the education and outreach program must have metrics that will evaluate the performance of the education and outreach program. It is up to the program operator to determine what metrics will best demonstrate the success of their education and outreach program based on what's in their proposed plan, but may include measurements like website hits, ad clicks, or survey results, among many other things. And lastly, the education and outreach program must include a description of how ultimate users will be encouraged to separate products that are not covered from covered products. All right. Moving down to the next bullet, coordination efforts are required in the event that multiple stewardship programs for either covered drugs or sharps are in operation concurrently or new stewardship programs begin operating. The plan must describe how the program operator will coordinate with other program operators to avoid confusion to the public and program participants. The plan should include processes for providing incentives, such as grants, loans, reimbursements, etc., as applicable, and a process for selecting service providers if applicable. Per PRC section 42036.2, a stewardship program under this state pharmaceutical and sharps waste stewardship law is not required to operate within a jurisdiction that has a local stewardship program ordinance that took effect before April 18, 2018. For this exception to apply, the local ordinance must cover the drug and sharp. The stewardship plan must include a description of the processes, logistics, and timing of implementation for the stewardship program to expand into jurisdictions not previously included in the stewardship plan in the event of a local ordinance repeal. So I know I just went over a lot of information about what is required in a stewardship plan, and all of these requirements can be found in statute and regulations for your reference. It is important to include every element that is required in a plan. Additionally, the clearer a section of your plan is about which requirements it is fulfilling, the easier CalRecycle's review will be. So for example, the requirement that I just went over for the plan to include a description of how the stewardship program will expand into jurisdictions not previously included in the stewardship plan is laid out in the regulations section 18973.2I. So in your plan, it would be helpful for our review if you could include that citation with the description of how your plan will fulfill that requirement. Okay, I'm going to pause and see if we had any questions.
Becky, there are no questions about the plan requirements at this time.
Awesome, thank you. All right. So with the submission of a stewardship plan, a program operator must also submit an initial program budget. The initial program budget is for the first 5 calendar years of operation and must include, at a minimum, contact information for the person overseeing the budget, the anticipated costs to implement the stewardship program broken down by budget category. These categories include, but are not limited to, capital costs, costs of collection, transportation, and disposal of covered products, administrative costs, including departmental administrative fee costs, education and outreach program costs, and any costs related to grants, loans, sponsorships, or other incentives as part of program implementation if applicable. In addition, the initial program budget must also include a recommended reserve level and a recommended funding level that is sufficient to cover costs over a multi-year period. For the initial program budget, a multi-year period means 5 calendar years. And finally, it is important to note that all administrative and operational costs are to be borne by the participating covered entities in a stewardship program. All right. We acknowledge that you are required to include a CalRecycle administrative fee in the initial program budget and that you need some information from CalRecycle in order to do that. Per statute, the administrative fee covers CalRecycle's and other state agencies' full and actual costs of administering and enforcing the law, including costs associated with regulatory activities before submission of stewardship plans. We are in the process of developing rough estimates for CalRecycle's portion of the administrative fee by calculating actual costs to date and anticipating, to the best of our ability, future costs based on our experience with the other stewardship programs that the department oversees. We're also coordinating with the Board of Pharmacy and other agencies to help build out the estimated administrative fee. We are not expecting this to be an exact number, but it will be a reasonable estimate. For the 24-month period commencing January 19th and ending December 2020, the cost estimate for CalRecycle's portion of the administrative fee for regulatory actions and program oversight is about $1.8 million. We will further develop these cost estimates for program operators with approved plans pursuant to CalRecycle's statutory authority. The first invoice will be issued on or before the end of fiscal year 22-23 and will include cost to date. Okay, I'm going to pause again. Marilee, have we received any questions?
Yes, Becky, we have some questions rolling in. I will look at one of the first questions that has come up. Give me 1 second, please. We have one question in regards to the stewardship plan. Will they be allowed to qualify if they want below information from me? I believe this question is coming from a consumer. And the manufacturer of her current medication says that they will provide a container and mail back for the sharps only if I sign up and agree to their terms and conditions, which allow them to disclose my info to third parties for up to 5 years if I want to enroll. So I believe her question is, will they being the program operator, be allowed to qualify the stewardship plan if they want the information from the consumer?
Right, okay. I think I'm going to direct that question to Irina. Irina, do you have any thoughts on that?
So, hi everybody. We need a little more time to respond to this specific question, and we may not be getting the full amount of information that we need. So we'll respond to this question later, but not right now during the webinar.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Marilee, is there another question?
We have one question regarding the Sharps mailback program.
Mm-hmm.
Does the material, sorry, Jason, did you want to say something?
No, please
Okay.
continue.
Okay. Does all the material for the Sharps mailback program, Sharps container mailback material, have to be distributed at time of sale, point of sale, or can the package provide information and direction for method to obtain all material? In question mark, in quotations, initiate distribution could describe providing the patient the path to obtain the Sharps container and mail back.
Yeah, so the statute and regulations say that the Sharps mailback program needs to explain how it will provide or initiate distribution of a Sharps waste container and mailback materials at the point of sale or prior. So essentially, if they aren't providing it at the point of sale, what other method they use to initiate distribution needs to be equally as convenient to the ultimate user as providing it to them at the point of sale. Does anyone have anything to add to that answer?
Hi, I would direct people to the provides and initiates distribution of a Sharps waste container and mailback materials definition and the definitions section of our regulations.
Great, thank you, Irina. All right, was there any more questions, Marilee?
We have a couple of more. This is a logistics question. Will this recording be available in addition to the slides? Is question 1.
Yes, so the PowerPoint will be posted on the public notice page, hopefully by the end of the week. And the recording, we're still kind of figuring out. I don't think it'll be posted, but if you would like to view it, I think you can request, send us an email and request the recording.
Thank you, Becky. We have one question regarding coordination. How will we know who the other program operators are in order to cooperate with them?
Yeah, it's a great question. Jason or Cynthia, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure. So I think this question is alluding to the requirement in the stewardship plan that you need to have a description of how you plan to coordinate with others. That's not a requirement that you have to identify all the other program operators. It's a requirement for you to describe how you are going to cooperate with them or coordinate with them. So I hope that helps clarify.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Becky, I think I'll just add to that. Thanks, Jason. One of the reasons why we are strongly encouraging folks who intend on submitting a plan to the department to, if you haven't already, to reach out to us so we can start getting a better sense of what program operators there may be and for which products. And we would be able to be in a position to help the program operators who have notified us that they intend to submit with that information so that that coordination can occur. So again, if you, even if you're just considering it, you don't have to be, you're not obligated if you contact us, obviously, but it would really help with that coordination as well. So.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Becky, we have a question about fees. The question is, for the fees, what is the start date of the fees that will be included on the first invoice for the administrative fees?
Ooh. Jason, do you know the answer to that? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I think more importantly than the start date on the invoice, it's when the billing starts, and the billing starts when the department incurred costs. So the first invoice will include all of the department's costs to date for the development of the regulations and the administration, basically all the costs that CalRecycle is incurring, as well as the other state agencies that submit costs to CalRecycle.
Thank you, Jason. Was there any other questions for Ellie?
Yes, Becky, we have a question. Do providers need to provide both mail-back and on-site collection services if they want to be a provider for program stewards?
I'm a little bit confused by the terminology they use by provider, what they mean by that.
Becky, I was gonna jump in and say
Right.
that I think we need to follow up with the individual who submitted the question, because there's a lot of other information that we're going to need in order to provide a thorough response.
Yeah, thank you.
Becky, I have one additional question at this time.
All right.
Can there be multiple stewardship programs for the same product? And the question goes on to expand a little more. For example, manufacturer A produces product ABC and also labels the exact same product with different labels, parentheses, product 1, 2, 3, and XYZ for other companies.
So
That is the expansion.
sorry. That's all. Okay. So I would refer back to the definition of a covered entity and how a covered entity can either itself operate a stewardship program or join a group of covered entities as part of a stewardship organization that operates a stewardship program. Yeah, essentially it comes down to who is the covered entity for those products. Yeah, does anyone have anything to add to that?
I'll piggyback and clump another question that came up related to covered entities. This question is in regards to the definition of covered entity. It says we are a manufacturer who uses contract manufacturing for some of our products. If buying through a contract manufacturer, is it their responsibility or ours? And I think there's some general guidance we can give you, but naturally the specifics of your supply chain come into play when you're making that determination. So the tiered definition of covered entity is in PRC section 42030F, and it first points to the manufacturer of covered drugs and sharps that are sold in or into the state, and it cascades on down from there.
Thanks, Jason.
Oh,
And Arena wants to add.
Yeah, if you have very specific questions about the definition of covered entity, then please reach out to us. It's very difficult for us to answer these questions if you get into very much detail. If we don't have, we need a little bit more information, a little bit more time to respond to you.
Great, thank you.
Becky, there was another question. It said the internet website mentioned on slide 10 belonging to which agency? Question mark. I believe slide 10 was a requirement as part of a stewardship plan. So that internet website would be maintained by the program operator, not a particular agency.
Yes, correct. Okay. Do we want to respond to any of the questions now or respond to them later and move on with the presentation?
Yeah, let's continue, and folks in the audience, please continue to send us questions. We appreciate them.
Can I just add one more thing? So it's the responsibility of the entity to figure out if it is a covered entity. So you need to spend some time looking at the definition and statute, and also, again, you may send us specific questions. But it's not CalRecycle's responsibility to define whether or not you, as a specific entity, are a covered entity.
Great. Thanks, Irina. All right. So, 1 second. Okay. Next, I'm going to go through the estimated timing of the activities for a stewardship plan to get approved so that the stewardship program can subsequently be implemented. So this is the more detailed timeline that I alluded to earlier. And I know that there's a lot going on in this slide, but I'm going to walk through all of the boxes. What I first want to emphasize is that the timing of these milestones is dependent upon a lot of variables, and multiple factors can delay implementation dates. So keep in mind that this graphic is not meant to show all statutory and regulatory deadlines and requirements. It does not replace a thorough understanding of these requirements. All right, so starting on the left side of the timeline, the regulations were effective January 7th, 2021. This timeline dedicates 6 months to stewardship plan development, which I'll go into more detail about on the next slide, but I want to mention up front the requirement to make submitted plans ADA, which is Americans with Disabilities Act, accessible. If this isn't a process that you aren't familiar with, I highly recommend exploring the resources that are linked at the bottom of the agenda. Making a document accessible can be time-consuming and should be done during plan development and not when the plan is complete and on a deadline to be submitted. The next milestone requires that program operators submit their entire stewardship plan to the Board of Pharmacy and any other applicable state agencies prior to submitting their plan to CalRecycle. Each agency must review the plan for compliance with state and federal laws and regulations related to the agency's respective authority. Plan submission to the Board of Pharmacy is required. However, it is the responsibility of a program operator to determine which other applicable agencies need to review the plan to ensure it complies with all laws and regulations relative to the covered drugs and sharps it intends to manage. Since each program operator has flexibility in the design of its stewardship plan, each stewardship plan may necessitate a different set of state agencies to review. If you are unsure whether a particular agency has purview over a particular aspect of your proposed plan, it would be best to contact that agency directly. And you can find contact information for the Board of Pharmacy and the Department of Public Health in the resources section of the agenda. Next, statute requires that program operators submit their stewardship plans to CalRecycle within 6 months of the effective date of the regulations, which would be July 7th, 2021. However, the time it takes the Board of Pharmacy to review and approve a stewardship plan does not count towards this 6-month deadline. This delay depends on the duration of Board of Pharmacy's review and is signified by the black arrows on this timeline. Statute requires a state agency, including BOP, to review plans within 90 days of receipt. If the plan is deemed non-compliant by an agency, the program operator should submit an updated plan to obtain a determination of compliance. However, if after 90 days, the program operator has not received a response from the reviewing agency, they may submit a certification to CalRecycle that their plan is compliant with all applicable laws and regulations. Okay, I'm going to pause quickly just to go over what I just talked about. So now that you've identified the appropriate agencies to submit your plan to, including the Board of Pharmacy, you've received determinations from them, you ensured that your plan is ADA accessible, and you were then ready to, and you submitted your plan to CalRecycle. So now, CalRecycle will review stewardship plans for completeness within 30 days and compliance within 90 days of receiving a complete plan. If a plan is deemed incomplete, it will need to be resubmitted to CalRecycle within 30 days. Once CalRecycle determines that a plan is complete, the compliance review begins. However, if CalRecycle needs to consult with other agencies during this review, the duration of time this takes does not count toward the 90-day review period. The department will either approve, conditionally approve, or disapprove of a submitted stewardship plan. Disapproval of a plan will result in a resubmittal within 60 days and another 90-day review by CalRecycle. These are just a couple examples of potential instances that could delay implementation and why this timeline is only an estimate. Moving along to the implementation phase, 1 year after the effective date of the regulations, which is January 7th, 2022, covered entities are subject to penalties if their covered product is not subject to an approved stewardship plan. CalRecycle is mindful of this 1-year deadline and will work as quickly as possible to review stewardship plans. However, it is up to the program operator to budget its time accordingly to fit within this deadline. To be proactive, a program operator should submit its stewardship plan to the Board of Pharmacy and any other applicable state agencies ahead of the 6-month July 7th deadline. The next milestone is the requirement for program operators to submit their first annual report to CalRecycle on or before March 31st, 2022. And finally, by 270 days after stewardship plan approval, the stewardship program must be fully implemented. Additionally, this is when local agency household hazardous waste facilities may begin accruing costs eligible for reimbursement related to home-generated sharps waste. Okay, so I'm going to pause again. Have you received any questions related to this timeline or any other topics?
Yes, Becky, we have a few questions coming in. I will start with a follow-up question regarding the administrative fees. Did CalRecycle start incurring expenses when SB 212 was signed in 2018?
So I think as Jason mentioned earlier, CalRecycle started accruing expenses when maybe Jason should explain this better than I can.
Yeah, we did incur expenses shortly after it being signed as we brought the team on board and started the pre-planning regulatory activities. We held informal workshops and there was a long time period of informal rulemaking before the 1-year formal rulemaking.
Thank you.
This is Cynthia. I'll just add to that. That is true. All of the planning and hiring and informal phase of the rulemaking, as well as the rulemaking, those all started effective the effective date of the law, which was Jan 1, 2019. So that we will not be charging 2018 hours. All of our tracked time begins Jan 1, 2019.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia, for a little more detail on that. Is there more questions?
Yes, Becky, we have a few more. The question is from a consumer. What can homebound persons and low-income individuals do with our sharps until this program is up and running? At this time, doctors won't take them, pharmacies won't take them, and the local sheriff's office won't take them.
Yeah, so I would recommend reaching out to us, the farmersharps@calrecycle.ca.gov email with your zip code, because we would be really happy to help you find some resources near where you live.
I'll just add this particular requester will follow up with separately.
Yeah, thank you.
Becky, the next question is, will this program manage devices that have sharps and batteries? For example, Omnipods for diabetics.
I think we would have to,
Yeah.
sorry. I think we would have to take a look at that and along with our legal counsel determine what, whether or not those particular products that you mentioned meet the exemptions as far as what's covered. So we wouldn't be able to respond to that particular question right now, but we'll follow up with you.
And I'll piggyback that sometimes CalRecycle is, oftentimes CalRecycle is not the agency that makes determinations of what covered products are. And so I'd encourage the stakeholder to look at the statutory definitions of covered product, and oftentimes Board of Pharmacy will be determining what a pharmaceutical is and so on.
Great, thank you.
Becky, the next question is, will CalRecycle be providing a pricing guideline for collection services? For collection services fees. For example, a maximum charge per collection service.
So, short answer, no, I don't think so. I don't think we're going to be providing any of that kind of guidance. I don't know if Arena or Jason wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify that this is, the price should be zero. It's free to the consumer. So I'm not sure, maybe there's some context to this question that we can follow up, or the stakeholder can follow up directly with us on, but the pharmaceutical and sharps program is free to the consumer.
Thanks, Jason.
Becky, at this time we have one more question. The question is, I am wondering if you have a document that lays out the responsibilities of SB 212 separated by entity. For example, jurisdictions, producers, recovery organizations, similar to how we have one for, CalRecycle, have one for SB 1383.
Yeah, so we don't have any other kind of guidance documents. Any of that information can be found in the statute and regulations. As far as responsibilities for local governments and consumers, there are none. There are some options for local governments to request reimbursement for the costs associated with sharps disposal from household hazardous waste facilities, but that is optional. It's not a requirement. Does anyone have anything to add?
Yeah, Becky, I'd like to just thank the person who sent in this question. So all of what Becky just said is correct. I'll just add that it's really good feedback because we're right now thinking about what we can do, what information we can provide on our web pages, maybe that we haven't typically done for the EPR programs that we currently oversee, but that might be helpful to users. So we're trying to take a fresh look at what might be helpful to provide. So if you have any other specific suggestions, we encourage you to send those in and we'll consider those.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. And thank you, Marilee, for reading out those questions. I will continue with the presentation, and any more questions that come in we'll address. Okay. Now I'm going to go over the requirements for stewardship plan submittal. As mentioned in the last slide, statute requires that program operators submit stewardship plans and initial program budgets to CalRecycle within 6 months of the effective date of the regulations. Again, this date is January 7th, 2021, but can be delayed pending the duration of Board of Pharmacy's review. Once CalRecycle receives a plan, There are 2 stages of review. First is the 30-day completeness review, where the department will determine if the submittal is complete or incomplete and will notify the program operator of its determination. Document accessibility will be a consideration in the completeness review. Once a document is deemed complete, the second review stage gives the department 90 days from the submittal of the stewardship plan, of the complete plan, to approve, conditionally approve, or disapprove the plan. The stewardship plan and initial program budget must be submitted electronically, be compliant with ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, pursuant to Section 18973A of the regulations, and include a certification statement that the information in the document is true and correct. I want to take a moment to pause and emphasize the need for the submitted plan to be ADA compliant. There are quite a few requirements that need to be taken into consideration when developing a document in an accessible way. Persons with visual disabilities often use screen readers to have the entire document, including descriptions of graphics and charts, read out loud to them. And in order for this feature to work, a document needs to be completely accessible. So when you're developing the document, you have to add captions and a description, which is called alternative text, to graphics and charts that will be read out loud by the screen reader so that a person with visual disabilities can understand what is being shown in those graphics or charts. Some other examples of actions that need to be taken to make a document accessible include checking and potentially correcting the order that a screen reader might be planning to read a document in, selecting an ADA approved font that is at least size 12, and ensuring appropriate color contrast. So an inappropriate color contrast would be a light font on a light background, and that would not be considered accessible. Many of the steps to create an accessible document need to happen before the document is converted to a PDF. And once the document is a PDF, there are additional steps that need to be taken. So all this to say, please factor these efforts into your timelines, as efforts to make a document accessible can be time-consuming. This is a requirement for completeness, and so that CalRecycle can post submitted plans on our website. We do not want to have to reject plans as incomplete because they were not ADA compliant. Again, please utilize the resources linked at the bottom of the agenda and contact us if you have any additional questions. Additionally, it would also be helpful to the department if stewardship plans could be posted on the program operator's website. All right, moving on to the next bullet. Any part of the submittal that the program operator believes is confidential should be identified and justified in a cover letter. CalRecycle will follow the Public Records Act, or PRA, process in managing that information. CalRecycle's minimum stewardship plan review time is 90 days, assuming that a stewardship plan is complete upon first submittal. CalRecycle is able to approve or conditionally approve a stewardship plan upon first submittal, and that CalRecycle does not need to consult with other state agencies about the stewardship plan. A plan is considered complete if it contains provisions intended to meet each applicable requirement and if it contains sufficient detail for the department to determine if the requirements have been met. This last bullet, it isn't a requirement for stewardship plan submittal, but it is worth noting that a program operator must submit any significant changes to a stewardship plan in writing for approval to the department and shall not implement the changes prior to that approval. Any significant changes to an approved stewardship plan shall be submitted to the department in accordance with the requirements I just went over from CCR section 18973, and shall include a recertification that the stewardship plan containing the significant changes is compliant with all applicable laws and regulations. All right, did we receive any more questions?
Yes, Becky, we have one more question at this time. The question is, what is the status of staffing at Board of Pharmacy for review of the stewardship programs and other items, questions related to SB 212?
Jason?
Yeah, so I've been in close coordination with Board of Pharmacy. I'll note that while they did have some staff turnover. There is staff there, and we do have a point of contact for folks to reach out to Board of Pharmacy. That will be, I believe, in the concluding slide, and it's also in the resources on the agenda. So I encourage folks that have questions for Board of Pharmacy to reach out to that contact.
All right, great. Thank you, Jason. All right, so I've covered a lot of requirements for stewardship plans, initial program budgets, and submittals, and the timing of these activities. We want potential program operators who are planning on submitting a stewardship plan to have a thorough understanding of requirements, and for the plans that are submitted to be as complete and compliant as possible from the beginning to avoid delays to program implementation. A couple of requirements we emphasized were the need to submit to the Board of Pharmacy and other applicable agencies prior to submission to CalRecycle, the requirement for program operators to coordinate with other program operators in the event that multiple stewardship plans for either covered drugs or sharps are in operation concurrently or new stewardship programs begin operating, and the requirement that the plan is accessible upon submittal. It is important to consider all of these requirements early on to avoid missing important deadlines. And lastly, I just want to reiterate that we're here to help, and if you intend to submit a plan, please email us to set up a meeting as soon as possible if you haven't done so already. And as Jason just mentioned, it's important to coordinate and communicate with the other appropriate agencies, including the Board of Pharmacy. So please see the resources section in the agenda and reach out if you have any additional questions or need any additional information. So that concludes the presentation portion of the webinar. Marilee will be monitoring the inbox for questions. So if you have any, please send them to pharmasharps@calrecycle.ca.gov. And the workshop will conclude at 4 p.m. or when there are no further questions. While people are formulating questions and sending them in, we did receive a couple questions prior to the webinar, so I'm just going to go ahead and answer those now. The first question was, if a manufacturer of covered products also manufactures covered products for a private label, who is the covered entity for these products? Is it the product's brand owner or the manufacturer? So any kind of questions related to who is the covered entity, we'll just refer you to look at the tiered definition of covered entity, which is in PRC section 42030F. And this definition first points to the manufacturer of covered drugs and sharps that are sold in or into the state, and that there is no exception in the covered entity definition for private label products. All right, next question was,
Sorry, do you mind if I just elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
So I just want to let folks know, just in regards to the definition of covered entity, that for the purposes of enforcement, as Becky mentioned, CalRecycle will presume that the manufacturer is the covered entity. However, if we find that that's not the case, then we will just move down the tiers that is stated in that definition in PRC 42030F.
Great. Thank you for that clarification, Eric.
And just one more clarification. So it's the manufacturer who sells in or into California. That's important. Yeah, so spend some time looking at those definitions.
Thanks, Serena. All right. The second question was, how are COVID-19 conditions impacting implementation of the required convenience standards? And are there any accommodations being made by the stewardship group to ensure collection is convenient during extended periods of collection sites being unavailable? If yes, how will program changes be communicated to residents? So, as noted in the timeline, stewardship plans need to be fully implemented by 270 days after plan approval. And you can find that in PRC section 42032G. And by our estimation, this will be around July 2022. In the annual report, program operators are required to provide the number of instances and corresponding amount of time a secure collection receptacle was not available and for each instance, why the secure collection receptacle is not available. So if COVID-19 conditions impact the availability of secure collection receptacles to the public during any business hours, then it should be disclosed in the annual report. And CalRecycle will take this into consideration when assessing convenience to ultimate users. So that's kind of related to covered drugs. So for home-generated sharps waste, the collection system will be a mail-back program and should not have any impacts from COVID-19 conditions. And the last part of the question, how will program changes be communicated to residents? It is up to the program operator of an approved stewardship plan to determine how they will communicate with local jurisdictions and its residents. However, per the Education and Outreach Program requirement, stewardship programs must conduct activities to promote awareness and maximize ultimate user participation in the stewardship program. Does anyone have anything to add to that? All right. And the final question that we received prior to the webinar was, how will local jurisdictions maintain communication with the stewardship group and or CalRecycle after SB 212 program implementation begins? So as I just mentioned, it's up to the program operator of an approved stewardship plan to determine how they will communicate with local jurisdictions. And as mentioned in the presentation, upon request from a local jurisdiction, a stewardship program for sharps waste can either reimburse the local agency for the actual cost of transportation and disposal of home-generated sharps waste at a household hazardous waste facility, or arrange for the removal of that home-generated sharps waste. So we would recommend signing up for CalRecycle's listserv, which is on this screen, so you can maintain communication with CalRecycle and also be notified when stewardship plans are approved. So those were the 3 questions that we received prior. Marilee, have we received any more questions?
We have, Becky, and I am going to start with a question related to what you just spoke about, related to household hazardous waste facilities. This is coming from the city of Glendale. We have a permanent household hazardous waste collection facility that serves the city of Glendale residents since 1991. In 2001, we began providing sharps containers for free to the community for the safe disposal of those sharps that our facility also disposed of. We also accept prescribed, parentheses, accept controlled substances and over-the-counter medications from the community. With the passing of SB 212, will the city of Glendale be able to offset its costs for the disposal of sharps and medications, and also the purchase of puncture-proof sharp containers? Can you please inform me how the city of Glendale can be part of this stewardship program?
Yeah, so Jason, did you want to hop in?
Sure, I'll take that one. I'm going to bring up a portion of statute that applies to the reimbursement opportunities for local governments. The reimbursement cost shall be limited to the actual cost of transportation from the household hazardous waste facility and for the actual costs of disposal. So that's the scope of the reimbursement for sharps. And granted, you also have to keep in mind that the program operator may opt to not reimburse the local government, but instead show up to the local government facility and pick up the material and manage it themselves. With regards to pharmaceuticals, the authorized collection locations will be part of that stewardship plan. They are responsible for those authorized collection locations. They're responsible for providing enough authorized collection locations, but they will not be responsible for HHW facilities acting as an authorized collection location if it's not part of their plan. So there is there's provisions where potential non-authorized collection locations or interested parties can reach out to these program operators and express their interest, and they have to conduct good faith negotiations in bringing them on board. But beyond that, it will not reimburse non-authorized collection locations for pharmaceuticals.
Great, thank you, Jason. And on that, I would just recommend that you, again, sign up for our email listserv so you're notified when stewardship plans are approved. And Irina?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that we also have a section in the regulations and the SHARPS plan. So that's 18973.3, and I believe it's G, talking about home-generated SHARPS waste removal.
Great. Thank you. All right. Is there more questions there, Marilee?
We have a few more, Becky. This next question is, how or where can a covered entity find out what drugs are considered, quotation marks, covered drugs?
Yeah, so I would direct you to the definition of the definition section of the statute. That would be 42030. Drugs is defined in there. What is not considered a drug is in there. Anyone have anything to add?
I'll just add that the manufacturers of the drugs know best and what their drugs are, and they have the obligation to report their covered drugs to Board of Pharmacy and what is not a covered drug to Board of Pharmacy for Board of Pharmacy's verification.
Becky, the next question that we have is, are there any packaging or labeling requirements defined by the program?
Packaging or labeling for drugs and sharps. We might need to follow up with that one and get a little more clarity on what they're asking.
The next question that we have is regarding administrative fees. With the administrative fees, parentheses, which sound like they will be huge, how are you allocating this across covered entities? Is it based on volumes or just divided evenly?
All right, I'm going to direct that to Cynthia, Jason, Irina, if anyone wants to jump on for that.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I wasn't quick on the draw here. The previous question was about packaging or labeling requirements. I'd like to touch on that briefly. The education and outreach program does have some requirements in this area. I'm referring to our adopted regulations that materials to be utilized by the program operator must be distributed in languages suited to local demographics. The materials shall include but are not limited to signage for hospitals, pharmacies, and other locations. Signage or labeling for secure collection receptacles shall be designed with explanatory graphics which are readily understandable by all ultimate users. So perhaps that is within the realm of what the question is asking.
Yeah, and I'll also note that for the mailback materials and container that's provided for the Sharps mailback program, there are requirements for any inserts or labeling on that as well in the regulations.
And Marilee, do you want to repeat the next question?
Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Regarding the administrative fees, with the administrative fees, how are you allocating this across covered entities? Is it based on volumes or just divided evenly?
I'm going to defer to Rena on this one. I think, we are still deliberating internally and establishing the administrative mechanisms to be able to handle these administrative fees. It's, again, the administrative fee is not just a CalRecycle cost. It also is supposed to incorporate the cost from other agencies, and that's a really unique provision of this bill, that we will be billing for CalRecycle's costs as well as the Board of Pharmacies and other agencies. So we are working actively with those agencies to develop the mechanisms and figure out how we will be invoicing industry. Marina, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that at this point. So I would direct you to the statutory provisions, which is, it's mainly section 42034.2 of the Public Resources Code. As well as, yeah, that's the main section.
Great. Thank you both.
I think, yeah, this is just really quick. The only thing to add is that particular section, Article 5 of the statute, does say that the program operator shall pay. So the department will be invoicing program operators.
I think that's a smooth segue to another question we received that says, does CalRecycle have an estimate of how many program operators will be approved to begin implementing programs? So we are in talks with multiple potential program operators. We don't know how many of them will be approved. It's contingent upon them submitting a complete and compliant plan. I will say we don't know what we don't know, but we are in talks with less than a half dozen potential program operators. There could be more. One of the questions was, will we receive the slides from the presentation today? No, not today. We will need some time to make them, to prepare them for putting them online, and we intend to add them to the public notice page. Were there additional ones, Marilee?
We have one more question. We are presently providing sharps and pharmaceutical collection services to some cities, to some cities - municipalities, and charge them service and disposal fees. How will the stewardship program affect this existing service agreement?
We might need more details and to follow up with that one. I don't know if anyone has anything to add. Irina?
Jason, do you have anything to add before I jump in?
Sure. I will say that this program does not directly affect existing service agreements. However, you may see impacts. Cities, municipalities, they may opt to submit reimbursement requests to program operators. They may opt to continue the contract with you. However, program operators are required to reimburse or pick up materials upon receiving those requests. So the other caveat to this is there are some existing local programs that will continue to exist, and the statewide program will not go into and disrupt those local programs. There's a provision that allows the counties that have established their own programs to continue operating their county program. And if and when they opt to dissolve their local program, then the statewide program would come into that jurisdiction. So I'm not sure if that applies for this questioner, but it really depends if the statewide program is coming there or not. Irina, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we don't know it seems like we need a little bit more information to answer your specific question. So there's a lot of assumptions that, Jason made. So if you can provide more detail, we will respond to you at a later time.
Great. Thank you both.
Becky,
yes.
I apologize. We have one question that came in about a minute ago. What are the steps that a potential authorized collector must take to express interest in participating in a stewardship program, and at what point in the process can this occur? The question goes on. Pursuant to Section 42032.2b1 of PRC, description of the process by which good faith negotiations with potential authorized collectors where and if applicable can continue to be conducted. The remaining portion of the question is a reiteration of that section 42032.2b1 of PRC. I'm sorry, I took that time. Let me read the question again. What are the steps that a potential authorized collector must take to express interest in participating in a stewardship program, and at what point in the process can this occur?
That's a great question. I don't know if Jason wants to answer. I don't have statute in front of me, but I believe that, oh, Jason, go ahead.
Okay. So there's a couple things that happen, and maybe Becky, while I'm talking, you can go back to the slide with the timeline. So the potential program operators are developing their plan. This is the blue phase here. The stewardship plan is under development. They are figuring out who they can use as authorized collectors. They're conducting good faith negotiations. They're bringing them on board, and they may have some success with that. Now, that doesn't mean that that is forever the only authorized collectors that will be part of their program. Additional sites might pop up, interest may shift, and new negotiations can occur. So the statute that was cited talks about how the program operators are developing a plan where if they receive an inquiry from a potential program operator, they will conduct good faith negotiations with that program operator. Now, if you're a potential authorized collection location, the best way for you to stay informed is to keep an eye on when CalRecycle receives plans. As we shift towards that yellow phase in the timeline, you can subscribe to the listserv, and when you hear about a program operator that submitted a plan to CalRecycle, if you have not already been reached out to, perhaps you have a pharmacy chain and you're interested in participating, but you haven't heard from this program operator, you could reach out at that time and conduct your good faith negotiations. Anybody else have something to add on that?
Becky and Jason, we did receive a little bit more elaboration on that question about packaging. Okay. The original question was, are there any packaging or labeling requirements defined by the program? The stakeholder goes on to elaborate. I was curious to know if home-generated sharps will need to include specific printed instructions as to how and where to dispose these products. If so, does this need to be shown on the outside of a retail package, or is it sufficient to provide this information in an instructional insert or on a website?
So, sorry, I'm just trying to find where it, statute or the regulations talk about that. So if this is someone who is a potential program operator, I would look at what is laid out in statute and, meet those requirements. And when you submit, we'll be evaluating plans on a case-by-case basis and making sure that they meet the requirements that are in statute and the regulations. I do believe that the inserts need to have, I don't know if someone else is looking and can find the specific citation. Jason?
I'll piggyback and add that, our supplemental information does not dig into this level of specificity in statute or regs. However, that's not to say that other requirements elsewhere require certain information to be included with that product. An example is I have an antibiotic that I am prescribed. I show up and I pick up that antibiotic from the pharmacy. There are certain instructions on how I take that antibiotic and, drink a glass of water with it, for example. Those kinds of instructions are regulated elsewhere, not part of this waste, the stewardship plan that is focused on the waste of those antibiotics when I'm done with the prescription and when, I might have some left over.
Jason, I just want to clarify that I believe this person was referring to home-generated sharps waste, and I think Irina was going to jump in on that. If not, I can add.
Sure.
I was just going to say, yes, that our statute and regulations don't define all of the requirements that are possibly out there, which are not under CalRecycle's authority, so we can't answer regarding those. And Cynthia, did you have like a specific citation to statute and regs? Okay.
Yeah, the regulatory citation 18973.3 F and number 2 is where it talks about the mailbag packaging, including inserts and the requirements. For example, for any sharps, the packaging and inserter instructions or separate information provided to the ultimate user shall include all necessary information on proper sharps waste disposal. And it goes on. So if you're asking for more detail, all of the detail that are in CalRecycle's regs are there. But like Jason said, there may be other regulatory requirements with regard to packaging inserts and packaging in general that would need to be met as well.
And the education and outreach component, which may also be related to this, is under 18973.3 I.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Did any additional questions come in, Marilee?
Yes, Becky, we have one more question. Under the subject of department's website of listed covered products, the question is as follows. Will the department allow time for the supply chain to validate the products listed on the department's website and remove those product offerings from California that are not found on the website?
So I'm assuming they're referring to, so per section, PRC section 42035A states that on or before June 30th, 2022, and at least annually thereafter, the department shall post on its internet website a list of stewardship organizations, including entities with approved stewardship plans and covered entities, authorized collection sites, retail pharmacies, and retail pharmacy chains provided in the stewardship plans that are in compliance with this chapter. So the department will not be posting a list of covered compliant products. Was that what the question was kind of getting at?
I believe so, yes.
Did anyone have anything to add? I don't know if I missed part of what they were asking.
No, I think you answered the question completely. Thank you.
Great. All right, did we get any other questions?
Becky, that was the last question at this time.
All right. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to send them in and we can respond to you via email. And I guess I'll hand it back over to Jason for some closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Becky, and the rest of the panelists and internal team members for putting in the work to make this webinar possible. And we hope you found it informative as an audience member. I'd also like to reemphasize that potential program operators who intend to submit a stewardship plan should reach out to CalRecycle staff as soon as possible for assistance. And once again, you can reach us at farmersharps@calrecycle.ca.gov. Thank you all for taking the time to participate today. This concludes the webinar.